Hello everyone, can you hear me? My name is Andrea Provaglio and I work as an independent consultant and coach on agile transformations. And tonight's talk is about self-organization, which of course is a very critical issue in every agile team. So this question is kind of rhetorical, and is self-organization crucial for an agile team? And of course, most people think that yes, it is crucial, for the very simple reason that a team that is not able to self-organize basically reverts back to a command and control culture, which we know doesn't work well for software development. I mean, it works, but it's not the best approach that we can take.
Andrea, I have one question. Can you turn up the volume a little bit?
I can try, or I can try to talk closer to the microphone. Is that better?
That's better. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Cesario.
Thank you.
So this talk is basically designed for storytelling. I decided that instead of going with all the theory and explanations behind the self-organization, it would work much better, since it's late night, just to go with the storytelling. And so I have a few stories from my personal experience as a coach that I want to share with you tonight. Before we start, one thing is that I would like you to keep in mind that in my approach, I tend to have a very systemic view of the organization. And I'm not talking about the theory of constraints of complex systems. I'm talking about looking at the organization as something that is where everyone is connected. There are forces within the system, forces from outside the system, and so on. And some of these forces are the peer-to-peer interaction, for example, or the leader-manager-to-peer interactions. And in general, a team, in my opinion, self-organizes much better when there is cohesion in the team, and I'll explain the concept of cohesion in a second, and when people are in the right place, and that's another concept that I'm going to explain in just a minute. So the first story I would like to tell you is the story of a team that I've worked with, and it was a team of about 15 people co-located in the same room. And the first day I started to work with this team, the first thing I noticed is that they managed to arrange their desks, the furniture, the computer, and so on, so that they created barricades. Every team member was somehow isolated and divided from other team members. And that was a thing that I noticed immediately. The other thing that I noticed later was that in that team there was a culture of constantly making fun of each other or pointing out people's mistakes and so on. It was supposed to be funny and mature, but actually it wasn't funny at all. And so I started to notice the way they were relating to each other. And all the things that they did, that they were doing to create barricades in their behavior, first of all, rather than in the way they have arranged the furniture. So one thing I noticed is that this team had a culture of a divisive talk, which means very often they were saying things that were meant to divide people rather than bringing people together. And of course, if you don't have cohesion in a self-organizing team, if you have division, self-organization is just not possible. Another thing is that they were used to take side against something or someone, which is a completely different story than, for example, taking side and staying with what you believe in, what you like, what you love. That's one thing. It's completely different from taking side against what you don't like or you don't want. And which, unfortunately, was what this team was doing. And you could see that, for example, in the way they related to the business analysts and so on and so on and so on. With all the information, that was another thing that this team used to do, which means that individuals, they didn't like to share information, technical information or other kind of information, because they thought that each of them could have a personal advantage if they didn't share information. And that, of course, created again division and barricades and fences and so on. Another thing I noticed is that from time to time, some of them used to kind of being pleased by someone else's mistakes or failures or misfortunes, which even when it's not applied to someone within the team, even if it's something that was applied, for example, to competitors or something like that, in my opinion, still generated a mindset of us against them. And this kind of mindset, inevitably, you bring into your team as well, even if apparently you don't. So that was another way of building fences and creating division in the team. And that thing was, I mentioned it at the very beginning, pointing out other people's mistakes, which of course comes from a blaming culture, comes from a judgmental culture. And we could talk 1 hour about judgment, but we don't have the time for that. So the story is that I didn't spend much, I didn't have time to change this attitude of the team. I didn't stay with them long enough to be able, as a coach, to change their mindset. But it was no coincidence, I think, that the way they had arranged the furniture and the way they talked and the way they thought were perfectly aligned one with the other. And I'm fairly convinced that if I had the time to change the way they simply talked to each other, eventually the furniture would have moved as well. And that team would have self-organized and much better. So basically, this is a story of things that you don't want to do in a team that is supposed to self-organize. The second story is a story of a team that was not very active. They didn't used to have much initiative, for example, or creativity, and they basically did what they were told to do. One thing that was interesting is that their manager had a very peculiar attitude to this team because, well, he shared with me part of his personal story. And for example, he explained to me that for a few years, he was not able to travel, even though he was a manager in a multinational corporation. But he was not able to travel because he had to stay with his family. And I didn't investigate, and I don't know if the issue was health or any kind of problem. I don't know what it was. But at some point, I started to realize that this manager was taking excessive care of his own team. And basically, the attitude was that he was acting as a controlling parent to his team. It was basically approaching the team as if they were children and they needed a lot of attention and care. So the way I was able to introduce a change in this case was that after a few days, a week or so, when I thought the timing was right, I just asked this person, this manager, a very simple question. And I asked him if he had noticed that all the people in his team were all adults and they were all in very good health. And he didn't answer, but I started to notice some change in the way he behaved with regards to the team. And I think that after a while, the situation was that he was starting to relate to the team as an adult talking to other adults. And at that point, the team felt more creative and inspired, and they were taking responsibility, they were having initiatives on their own. And so that was one thing to promote self-organization in that specific team. And the third story is not actually a story, it's something I get all the times when I move from team to team, is when people start rowing against the tide, which means when people that are in a certain position in organization, they have certain responsibilities, they try to suggest changes that are beyond their control. One very common thing is, for example, a technical leader that comes to me and starts telling me that he would like very much that they had a very nice continuous integration and test coverage framework, and he would like to do more pair programming or things like that. but management is not willing to do so. Now the thing is, very often when I ask these people why would they want to introduce this kind of change, the answer boils down to because I would feel better if we did. And but that has nothing to do with what the with how the organization would feel. I mean, the question is, would the organization feel better as a whole system if you did introduce that kind of change? And also, another thing to take into account is that very often these people are not in the position to introduce that kind of change, but they suffer because that change is not happening. Now, that's a very stressful position to be when you want something, when you think that your well-being or happiness or whatever you want to call it depends on something that is outside of you and that you cannot control. Now, that is a very hard position to be in. And usually these situations lead to sadness or resentment or angry people or people who are not collaborative. So the thing is, it's much easier to go with the tide than to go against the tide in an organization. And very often people who are not in their place, which means that they don't understand where they are and what are their responsibilities and what are the changes that they can introduce. When they don't understand all these and they want to do something else, well, at that point they are rowing against the tide. And the thing is that the tide always wins. So these were my 3 stories for you tonight. And I basically was suggesting to move from a culture where you have division, people are out of place, and there's no energy in the team, to a place where you do have cohesion, where people are in the right places, and the environment is energetic and active and creative and so on. All the things that we absolutely need if we want to talk about self-organization. And if you work as a manager or a leader or a coach or whatever, one way to introduce the change, in my opinion, is start the change with yourself and let the change propagate to the people that work with you. So that was it. And these are my contact information. And thank you very much for listening. Thanks a lot.